I had no idea the British press was so bigoted.
This one's wife, blazing row, and Harry leaves. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. The relationship with the narcissist is invariably a tempestuous one, especially where it is in the intimate arena. This is because the intimate partner primary source spends a lot of time with the narcissist, which means that there is increased scope for them, inadvertently, to threaten the narcissist's pervasive need for control. The narcissist, being hypersensitive to issues of threat to control, will then lash out. Often this occurs without the victim realizing that they've done anything wrong. It could be something as simple as failing to make the narcissist a cup of tea, even though the narcissist didn't intimate that they were wanting a cup of tea, that they didn't indicate that they required a cup of tea. But remember, because the narcissist is the center of the universe, everybody else is expected to understand the needs and requirements of the narcissist even when they're not expressly stated. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But that is how it works. And that's why you, where you've been involved with a narcissist, will have repeatedly fallen foul of the narcissist's needs because you didn't understand them, and you should have done. And you end up in a bit of a double bind. First of all, you ought to have understood what the narcissist wanted, and the fact that you failed to do so reinforces the fact that you're not a very nice person in the eyes of the narcissist. You failed, and you ought to have known anyway. And where you protest but you didn't say, that doesn't wash with the narcissist. You're expected to know. It's almost the case that the narcissist expects that you should know telepathically what the narcissist requires. Harry faces this situation with this one's wife, where he's expected to second guess what she requires repeatedly, and that he will repeatedly fail in that endeavour, which threatens her need for control, which results in her issuing a devaluation towards him. For instance, the recent delinquency in relation to Archwell will have been blamed on Harry. You may have seen the pictures that showed the gruesome twosome on their return from Nigeria, with this one's wife marching ahead of Harry. It certainly didn't paint a picture of togetherness, and of course reinforces that all of the hand-holding that goes on is 1, the physical assertion of control by this one's wife over Harry, and 2, facade management. Look at us, we have such an idyllic marriage. But when this one's wife believes the cameras aren't watching, then there's no need for the hand-holding, because there's no need for a facade. And on their arrival back in the United States, she walked ahead of Harry, gripping her iPhone, staring away from him as he traipsed behind, looking all for the world like the hired help rather than her husband. But it would appear that this was also linked to the fact that there was a blazing row between them. Apparently, this one's wife already felt that the lustre that came from the Nigeria tour, the shine that she felt was generated by it, as she would have largely seen it as successful, already had become lost as a consequence of the Archwell delinquency. Naturally, it can't be her fault, and instead, it's necessary for her to blame somebody else. And, according to Neil Sean, it's Harry who gets the blame, that apparently he's the one who was meant to have dealt with it. Apparently, that he is the one that takes care of such matters, and that he was the one who was meant to liaise with the staff to get it done and explain that it's sorted. And according to Mr. Sean, Harry had the responsibility of ensuring that this was undertaken, and that he explained, apparently, to this one's wife that everything had been sorted out, when, of course, it's evident that that's not the case, and that the foundation found itself in this delinquency with the corresponding coverage of that, which again threatens this one's wife's need for control. This precipitated, apparently, a blazing row, which, of course, is entirely conceivable. The fact that, one, this one's wife is basking in the golden glow of what she sees as a successful tour, only on arrival back in the United States to learn that Archwell is in delinquency, amounts to a considerable threat to control, and this is amplified by the press coverage. This then ignites her heated fury, which drives her to lash out at whoever's nearest to her, which happens to be Harry, as the hapless intimate partner primary source. If it is correct that it was his job to liaise with the staff, and that he said that it had been done, then she is going to round on him and blame him for this. Even though it might have been a failing of the staff and not Harry, it doesn't matter. The main point is it can't be this one's wife's fault, and it must be somebody else's fault. And because of the threat to control that's posed by the news that Archwell goes into delinquency, and that offends that need for control and everything that comes with it, wounding her, she then experiences that ignited fury which drives her to lash out at Harry, undoubtedly insulting him, belittling him, invalidating him. And again, according to Mr. Sean, the consequence of that was that Harry retreated, that he ran away from the row and went off to one of his little bolt holes dotted around Monty Shitshow. As ever, I leave it up to you to determine the veracity of what has been said in that regard, but it certainly plays out in relation to the narcissistic dynamic, whereby it would be a threat to control to learn that Archwell is in delinquency, that it would be necessary for her to lash out at somebody to apportion blame to them, whether rightly or wrongly, that this would be driven by her heated, ignited fury that would result in a row. Now, as I've explained to you before, Harry has strong narcissistic traits, which includes anger and argumentativeness, and therefore he will have stood his ground up to a point. But he has been in the sustained devaluation for some time, and he's getting ground down by it. After a tour where he will have felt like second best, see parts pass him, a tour where further criticism has come about, that to return and find himself traipsing behind her like the hired help, as she first of all doesn't speak to him and then turns round and has a massive Barney at him, ultimately it may well prove to be more than he could stand, and thus, rather than tolerate it, he retreats. Now, his retreat, of course, would wound her, because he's no longer interacting with her, and he goes away from her. However, it's unlikely that she would have sought to pursue him, some narcissist would, but instead her narcissism would then shift from trying to assert control over him directly by basically going to the third assertion of control and saying, well, fuck you, run away, you're pathetic. And thus she makes it seem as if she has allowed him to go, thus giving her that subconscious need for control. That she deems that he is to be let go of, in effect, and thus it doesn't affect her any longer. He'll have come crawling back, and the reset button will have been hit, as is invariably the case with the dynamic with the narcissist, and they'll move on to the next thing. But once again, Harry finds himself devalued, blamed for something that probably wasn't his fault, and finds himself on the receiving end of another tantrum from his handler. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.